Representative Keller's district is here where we're currently sitting, and appreciate Representative Keller helping us to secure the facilities today. And he'd like to, you can bring that up to the front stage here if you would. Representative Keller, if you'd like to welcome us to your district, I believe you want to say a few words to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to say to the members of the committee, the people here to testify, welcome to Selinsgrove, welcome to Susquehanna University. Want to say thank you to President Lemons and the university for hosting our committee. Also, Commissioner Malcolm Dirk, who's standing in the rear of the room, has been a big help in securing the facilities. He is a graduate of Susquehanna University, and we thank them for their hospitality. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Keller. Are we close to having a United States flag? Not if they brought the Pennsylvania flag in. Thank you, Representative Keller, for helping us to secure the facilities today and for welcoming us. We don't have a color guard bringing it, but we do have somebody bringing a flag for the stage before we get started. Representative Keller, could you check and see if it's going to be more than a minute or two we're going to get started? We don't have any music to accompany you, but we appreciate you bringing the flag in for us. Thank you very much. This meeting of the House State Government Committee is called to order, and before we have our member secretary call the roll, I could ask everyone to please stand and Representative Saccone to lead us in a pledge, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Representative Saccone. I could ask our member secretary, Representative Hill, to call the roll for the State Government Committee members, please.
Chairman Metcalfe.
Here.
Representative Barrar.
Leave.
Christiana.
Leave.
Dush.
Leave.
Gobbler.
Leave.
Hill here. Knowles. Miller. Here. Roy.
Leave.
Ryan. Saccone.
Here.
Sankey. Stats.
Leave.
Walsh.
Leave.
Ward. Wieland.
Here.
Chairman Bradford. Representatives Bullock. Daly. Here. Delicio. Here. Dean. Fitzgerald. McCarter.
Here.
Rabb.
We have a leave for Representative Rabb.
Yeah.
Sims.
Leave.
Solomon.
Leave.
Vasquez.
Thank you, Representative Hill.
And I believe it was leave for Bullock, too, as well. And Dean. And Dean.
members will have time throughout the day to submit their leaves if we don't have a record of them yet. We are joined by a number of other members today, and we do have extra seats here on the stage. I'd like to invite the other members that are joining us here today that aren't members of the State Government Committee but have an interest in this issue to join us if you'd like to take a seat with the committee members. And after we entertain questions with the testifiers, if there's time for additional questions beyond the committee members' request for questions, then I'll be happy to allow our colleagues to join in the questioning as there's time. Representative Tallman, Representative Fred Keller, of course, Representative Mark Keller, Representative Kiefer, Representative Menser, and Representative Zimmerman. I don't know if I missed anybody that might be here, but if there's any other members here, please join us on the stage. We'd love to have you sit with the committee for our hearing this morning. As you can tell, we have a lot of interest outside of the State Government Committee in this issue today, and our opening remarks today will be offered by Representative Dan Mowell, who's also here. Dan, if you could take the testifier seat there in front of us. And I understand you have a few minutes worth of comments to bring us up to date on your thoughts on this issue, and I'm sure that some of our colleagues off to my left would share those. We're also being joined by Representative Sankey, who is on the State Government Committee. Thank you for coming this morning, Representative Sankey, and should be plenty of seats up here for you. Representative Mao, you can begin when you're ready, sir.
Good morning, Chairman Metcalfe, Acting Minority Chairman Brett McCarter, and members of the House State Government Committee and other members attending. I would like to start by thanking the chairman for agreeing to host this hearing, as well as the upcoming hearing in Shrewsbury, York County. Some of you might be wondering why we are here, or maybe even what is the SRBC. The Susquehanna River Basin Commission was formed in the late 60s as a three-state compact with the intention of regulating uses of surface water from our streams and rivers within the basin, as to make sure that users upstream did not draw too much water, not leaving enough for downstream users and aquatic life. 18 years later, the Commission decided to start regulating well water when they come to realize that when the compact was formed, there was no legislative oversight built in whatsoever. There are 4 commissioners, which are the secretaries of the environmental resources in each state, as well as a commissioner from the Army Corps of Engineers. Most voting meetings are attended by the alternates of the 4 commissioners. At this point, the commission has instituted an overwhelming amount of regulation, fees, fines, and permitting, otherwise called dockets. 2 years ago, I received a call from the very small borough of East Berlin. It was explained to me that they were receiving invoices for monitoring wells that had been 40-plus years old and/or proven wells. This, myself as well as my senator, and Representative Tallman certainly did not understand the fees that this little borough was being charged. We started doing this research into this commission, and what we found literally made the hair stand on the back of my neck. At that point, my senator, Alloway, called a meeting with the SRBC in his office to drill down to the bottom of these issues. It was during that meeting that I realized the arrogance of this commission and how most of what we had to say was shrugged off. I did, however, ask all 4 of those attending from the commission what their salaries were. I was shocked to hear that all 4 of them were in excess of $100,000 per year. After another year and a half of investigation by myself as well as many other legislators, we come to realize that we had a situation of extreme gravity that must be dealt with. We felt that there was a serious abuse of authority, and we questioned the authority that they have taken. We called a meeting with the Acting Secretary of Pennsylvania of the Department of Environmental Protection, as well as multiple legislators, senators, and representatives from boroughs, townships, and business. The Secretary brought his alternate, Kelly Hefner. After approximately an hour and a half of listening to grievances and testimony from our guests, we asked the Secretary to work with us to get the SRBC back to their mission statement. One last question that I asked Acting Secretary McDonald's alternate, Kelly Hefner, was, and I quote, do you believe that the SRBC needs to have more regulation and more funding to continue their business after hearing of the balances of their two accounts of nearly $40 million of taxpayer money, which was acquired through fines and fees, and all of the complaints of overregulation? After a few moments of staring at me, her answer was a very meek no. I immediately followed up with a final question for her, to which there was no answer, and that question was, and I quote, "Then why did you rubber stamp a yes vote for the SRBC to increase its fees and the new regulations at the last meeting?" To this day, we have still not received a response from this meeting from now Secretary McDonald. Later that afternoon, I received a call from a reporter from Channel 27 News who had heard about our meeting with the Secretary and did a report on the evening news. After it aired that evening, the calls and emails started to roll in from all over the Susquehanna Valley. I was taken aback by how many municipal authorities and businesses had called or written to complain about the overreach and abuse of the SRBC. This is when I knew that we must do something, which brings us to these hearings. I thought that it would be a snap to get as many testifiers as I could possibly need to tell their story so that we might have a better understanding of what is going on behind our backs within our Commonwealth. Much to my chagrin, when contacting the vast majority of these people to testify, there was a common theme of, "I'm praying for you guys to do something, but I'm scared to death to get involved publicly for fear of retribution." One very large water supplier here in the valley told me just last week that she could be fired just for talking to me about this. She said, and I quote, "They hold our company's whole life in their hands." She wished me well and said that she would watch the progression of this issue very closely. I would like to review the details of an email I received from a very small business right here in the valley just a few weeks ago. This will be a very small sample of what you're about to hear in these next two hearings. And this is very short, I'll be brief. It says, "Hello, Mr. Mao, thank you for meeting with us regarding our concern for SRBC laws and regulations. As discussed in our meeting, I will be required to renew my consumptive use and groundwater withdrawal docket in 2022. My current docket, effective for 25 years, will be replaced with a new docket effective for 15 years. Below are upcoming fees issued by the SRBC to process this renewal. These fees based on today's rates, which by 2022 will probably be higher, but at today's rates, he says groundwater withdrawal fee will be $16,550. Aquifer testing plan is $5,100. The consumptive use plan is $12,150 for a total renewal fee on his well of $33,800. An additional annual compliance and monitoring fee will also be added as soon as my new docket takes effect in 2022 of $1,050. I will be applying for an aquifer test waiver to avoid the need for a hydrogeologist to test my current well. If the SRBC requires me to complete the aquifer test, I may be looking at an additional $50,000 to $60,000 in engineering and contractor fees. Because of this hearing today, he asked me not to say the name of his business publicly, but it is a small public golf course. After hearing testimony today and in Shrewsbury in 2 weeks, I sincerely hope that we can work together with the SRBC to legislatively bring them back to what the framers of the original compact mission statement was meant to be. Once again, I'd like to thank Susquehanna University, the chairman, and the members of the House State Government Committee for allowing these hearings to proceed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Mao. You can take a seat with the committee if you'd like to join us.
Thank you.
Our first testifier this morning will be Mr. Andrew Dehoff. He's Executive Director with the Susquehanna River Basin Commission. Thank you, sir, for joining us today.
Thank you. Morning, Mr. Chairman.
Morning. You can begin when you're ready, sir.
Thank you. As Chairman Metcalfe stated, my name is Andrew Dehoff. I'm the Executive Director of the Susquehanna River Basin Commission, and I appreciate the opportunity to address the committee regarding SRBC's practices. I've distributed my written testimony, which I attempt to explain why the commission does what it does and why it's important. So my intent right now is to offer a very brief summary of that because I want to leave as much time as possible to answer questions about specific concerns. Representative Mao gave some background of the commission, but just to recap, and for any committee members not familiar with us, we were created in effective January 1971 when the 4 jurisdictions, the federal government and the states of New York, Maryland, and Pennsylvania all signed identical legislation that we call the Susquehanna River Basin Compact that created the commission and laid out its authorities and responsibilities and duties. Some of the things that the compact allows us to do, just to give you an example of some activities we're currently undertaking. We're completing restoration projects of abandoned mine lands in Clearfield, Indiana, and Schuylkill counties. The project in Schuylkill County is not yet complete, but in Clearfield and Indiana County, we're seeing wild trout living and thriving in streams that have not hosted trout in a century. In Cumberland County, we recently partnered with a community to address a recurring sinkhole problem, and that solution not only addresses the sinkhole problem, but is also helping the township meet its state and federal stormwater requirements. We've assisted Lancaster County in developing the water-related aspects of their county comprehensive plan, and also completed a study of favorable groundwater locations to assist in development planning. We are also in the midst of preparing flood stage mapping for properties along the Sotera Creek in Dauphin, Lebanon, and Schuylkill counties. So that gives you a snapshot of kind of the non-regulatory things we do, which unfortunately don't get a lot of attention. As far as the regulatory role, the compact directs us to defer to the states. Our primary function, therefore, is to fill regulatory and management gaps. We do not duplicate efforts. The unique regulatory authorities that we've developed pertain to only 3 activities related to water: the movement of water in and out of the basin, what we call diversions, the withdrawal of water from a surface or a groundwater source, and the consumptive use of water. The purposes of the diversion and the consumptive use regulations are spelled out in the written testimony, so I won't go into detail on that right now, but I would like to spend a minute on withdrawals, and particularly groundwater wells. I need to correct Representative Mao's statement regarding groundwater. Groundwater is spelled out as an authority in our compact on equal footing with surface water and consumptive use. It's true that the legislation was originally drafted in the late 60s, but as I said, the commission became effective, the compact became effective in January of 1971, and it was only 7 years later, in 1978, that we promulgated our first groundwater regulation. So it was on our minds early as an important aspect of our duties. The purpose of our withdrawal rule is simple. It's to ensure that communities have sustainable, reliable sources of water to provide to their homes, businesses, and industries. To us, sustainable and reliable means that their sources can continue to provide needed water even during times of drought and can do so without conflict. There's been a lot of attention on water quality lately, both in Pennsylvania and nationwide, and understandably so. Safe drinking water is critically important. But the quality of water is irrelevant. Sure.
I'm with Sergeant Reporting Company, sir. I'm the stenographer for the day.
These members are members of the committee.
What would you like me to set up, sir?
We change this way.
Okay.
No problem. As I was saying, everyone understands the importance of safe drinking water, but the quality of the water really doesn't matter if nothing comes out when you turn on the taps. That's really our role, and that's why for nearly 40 years we've been reviewing and improving withdrawals of water from groundwater wells. There's often a lot of misperceptions about groundwater. It's a very complex science, so complex that Pennsylvania requires that anyone practicing the analysis and assessment of groundwater and associated geology must be licensed by the Commonwealth as a professional geologist. That includes staff of SRBC that review the information submitted by applicants. Because each well is completely unique, assessments of the capability of any individual well to deliver a certain quantity of water does require some effort and some data collection. So I acknowledge that permitting a well can be a costly venture, but I look at it as similar to replacing old failing water mains. It's an investment in a secure and reliable water supply to meet long-term needs. I'll wrap up by touching on a few challenges SRBC has faced over the past several years and how we responded to those challenges. First, I'd like to mention the introduction of the unconventional natural gas industry to the basin, in which case we needed to figure out how to handle requests for water in a fashion that we'd never experienced before. It was an industry unlike any other. We responded rather quickly, adapted, and modified our rules, I believe, 4 times in a period of 5 years, so that we could put in place reasonable policies to allow the industry access to the water it needs, but to do so in a sustainable fashion. Second challenge was around that same time, along with the nationwide economic downturn, Pennsylvania's annual contribution to SRBC began to decline. We used that fund to fund general operations and the projects that I mentioned previously. We now receive barely half the annual funding we received in 2008, and we're looking at even less in the current pending budget. I understand that given the tough economic situation the Commonwealth is facing, but the result is that it has required us to respond by increasing fees to the regulated community to offset the funds that we're subsidizing that review. I'm happy to report that we've been able to keep municipal fees level and able even to offer discounts to municipal systems, but I am concerned about our ability to continue to maintain discounted fees for municipalities in the face of continuing declines in our appropriation from the Commonwealth. The third challenge is that we routinely encounter systems that are relying on wells with unknown limitations, either because the well never went through the regulatory process or because it was permitted 40 years ago and proper assessment was never done or records were never kept. It is our firm desire to give these communities the permits they need so that they have the water their community needs. But if we have no information to base it on, despite sometimes decades of operation, we have no choice but to collect some data. The reality is that many towns are counting on old, unproven wells to supply water for future growth. Our long-term goal is that communities will collect the information they need to provide certainty that their groundwater sources will meet long-term needs. Final challenge I'll mention is that between 2013 and present, SRBC has seen a near complete turnover of our senior management and a new commissioner from each of our 4 jurisdictions. But as Albert Einstein said, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity, and I believe that's a point where we now find ourselves. Change in leadership personnel is an opportunity to review policies and practices, for example, using what we've observed over the past few years related to the renewal of groundwater sources. I'll close by pointing out that we are making efforts to improve our policies and our practices. The steps we have taken or are taking include substantial fee discounts for municipal water supply systems, equal to 44% of the standard fee. We've changed the rule regarding existing sources needing to come in for renewal or approval to allow increased flexibility in application submittals. We've created a public water supply assistance program to offer technical assistance and further fee reductions to small municipal water supply systems. We've been conducting targeted coordination meetings. A few months ago, we met with representatives of golf courses and golf course trade groups to talk about their concerns and how our long-term priorities may be able to address them. That's a conversation along with other groups that we intend to continue. And finally, we will convene listening sessions throughout the basin this summer. The time has come to update SRBC's comprehensive plan and the annual strategies that we use to achieve the objectives spelled out in the plan. And we want outside input for that. We've already held our first session to gather such input. It was 2 weeks ago in Lancaster County. We have another scheduled for the end of this month to gather input from the Adams, Cumberland, York County area. And we certainly will look to plan other sessions in this area of the basin as well as New York. I do recognize that we have more work to do. I believe we all share the same goal of communities having secure and reliable sources that meet their current and future needs, even during times of drought, so that their residences and businesses can operate without conflict or limitation. I will tell you in my experience, although we may sometimes disagree, the men and women that make up the boards of water authorities and the townships and boroughs they serve are exemplary public servants. They are conscientious and dedicated to doing what is right for their communities. My very strong hope is that those communities, particularly small communities, will come to view SRBC as a partner, and I commit to working with the communities and you to figure out what additional changes we can make to better achieve our mutual goals. Thank you for allowing me to testify. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir, for testifying today. Just a reminder to the State Government Committee members, and probably new information for our other colleagues sitting in with us today to potentially be involved in some Q&A. The way that I run the committee meetings, we invite testifiers to testify, and those testifiers are our guests. We treat them as such. They're not here for us to debate with them. They're here for us to solicit information from and to gather information from and to kind of pick their brains for whatever expertise on whatever issue we're talking about. So we're not to treat our testifiers as hostile witnesses as they would in a courtroom. They're here to deliver information, so we're not here to debate with them. We'll debate amongst each other after this hearing, I'm sure. But this hearing isn't for debate. This hearing is for gathering information. With that, I'd like to, Representative Hill would be the first member I'd like to recognize to ask questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Dayhoff. Appreciate you being here today. I think that there is general consensus on this committee that the overall mission of having adequate water supply in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is something that's very important. So trying to understand your regulatory authority and who has oversight over you, meaning the SRBC. Does the Independent Fiscal Office have any type of review over the SRBC and its regulations?
No.
Does the Independent Regulatory Review Commission have any oversight or review authority over the SRBC and its regulations?
No.
Is the SRBC subject to Pennsylvania's right-to-know laws?
Not specifically, but we've developed our own access to records policy, similar to Pennsylvania's right-to-know law.
Okay. Does the Auditor General have authority over the SRBC?
It's my understanding that that type of authority would come from the U.S. General Accounting Office, or General Administration Office.
So Pennsylvania has no way of going in and auditing your use of funds appropriated by the legislature, signed into law by the governor from the general fund.
Of course they do. It's Pennsylvania's a member of the commission, and any of the commissioners are entitled to any and of all of our documents that they would like to see.
Okay, so we would be able to obtain information for the Auditor General to look at with regards to the fees that are charged, any of the fines that are assessed on Pennsylvania businesses or municipalities?
Absolutely. I mean, we're also, the compact requires the commission to have an independent auditing firm conduct an audit every year. So that information is available, but yes, you can request anything you like.
And then the reserve funds that you maintain, are they also auditable?
Of course.
Okay. With regard to federal oversight, you referenced GAO. Are you also subject to FERC?
No, FERC has recognized that we have concurrent jurisdiction, meaning that we share information, but our regulatory authority is not precluded by theirs.
Okay, so ultimately, when you promulgate regulations, is there any type of review process? Who ultimately are you responsible to when you seek to promulgate those regulations that you impose?
I've heard many times that there is no oversight. From my perspective, having to move a proposed regulation from draft to final, we have the process of getting 4 jurisdictions to agree to a proposed regulation. So that's 3 governors, their legal counsel, as well as the federal government. Any rule that is proposed must go out for public comment. So we're subject to review and oversight by the public and whatever comments they wish to make on the rule. So there is a very extensive and public, an open process before any rule is promulgated.
But there is no independent authority to oversee. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Hill, I just need my mic to work whenever I'm speaking into it. We have some other members that also have questions. You were like a machine gun with the questions. I appreciated the short answers, but
Yes.
need to move on to another member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you,
you.
Mr. Dehoff.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Representative Daly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. DeHoff, thanks for being here today. So I believe that you said that back after 2008 that the Pennsylvania's annual contribution declined and that now you're receiving about half of what you had received in the past. So how are the contributions from the different states and the federal government aligned, and are you seeing declines in their contributions?
Originally, there was an understanding that each of the four would contribute 25% an equal share to our operating expenses. I think it was 2006, they adopted a resolution recognizing that Pennsylvania has a larger portion, about 75% of the land area of the basin, and adopted an understanding or an agreement that Pennsylvania would contribute 37.5% of our operating expenses. Maryland would maintain, and the federal government would maintain their 25% share, and the additional that Pennsylvania picked up would come out of New York's share, reducing their share to 12.5%. And of course, our annual budget far exceeds what we actually receive. So when I say percentages, it's the percentage of those expenses that we request from the jurisdictions. The federal government has paid its fair share only once in the past 20 years, but we do receive other forms of federal grants, particularly through EPA for our work with the Chesapeake Bay monitoring and helping Pennsylvania meet its goals. New York and Maryland have stayed relatively steady over the past 8 years.
And are the increased fees for any that you're charging to the other entities that are withdrawing water, are they uniform across all 3 states?
They are, although our fee schedule does include a provision that should the annual contribution from any member not meet its obligation, that we reserve the right to take a look at the discount that we offer the communities in that jurisdiction, because that's the purpose of one of the purposes of the annual contribution is to offset fees to municipalities.
And in the budget that we have in front of us, are you aware of what the Pennsylvania's contribution would be estimated to be at this point? I know we're not done with the budget process, but can you? The
budget adopted by the House is a 50% reduction in our fee from $473,000 to whatever half of that is.
Okay, so it's less than the 37.5 by.
Yes.
And do you have an idea what the percentage is?
The 37.5% would be about $800,000 this year, so we're looking at about 25% of the request.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Saccone.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. I'm sorry that I'm so ignorant of how you operate and what you do, so this seems like a very basic question, but as I was listening to your testimony and reading it, I understand that you regulate large consumers of water.
That's right.
You don't drill down to the local guy who has a well on his property, or he's gathering water in a cistern from his roof and those type of things.
Not at all. No, the purpose of the commission is to regulate large and interstate uses. In fact, there are many towns in the basin that don't even need commission approval, and sometimes we work with them. If they're exceeding our thresholds, we'll look at them and look at their system and say, if you can fix some leaks or tighten up some inefficiencies, we've had towns be able to reduce their usage below our thresholds, so they're completely free and clear of any SRBC permitting.
Okay, and then the costs that you say that that each compact member contributes to, have you made any efforts to reduce those costs? I notice your salaries, pensions, and benefits, and so forth have been seem to be well compensated. Let's say, have you tried to reduce any of the other costs that are associated with your agency?
The first month I took over as executive director, I asked our chief financial officer and her accounting manager to look at our costs, and immediately within a month reduced $50,000 in, just looked at insurance policies and things like that. And like I said, there was a near complete turnover of SRBC management. The only senior level position of let's say 6 or 7 positions was our chief financial officer. The rest were completely new. So it was an opportunity to consolidate some positions, look at responsibilities, and do a little bit of reorganization. So I was able to reduce those positions from 6 or 7 to 5 or 6. So yeah, I think that was very much a cost savings. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Cohn. Representative DeLisio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning.
Good morning.
You have a reserve fund, the Susquehanna River Basin Commission.
That's right.
What is that reserve fund currently total, roughly?
Well, just for the sake of being complete, we have 2 reserve funds. One is our general fund. That's a rainy day fund, if you will. We have no idea from year to year what application fees we may get in because we don't know who will be applying. We have no idea what our appropriations from our members will be, no idea what grants will be renewed or awarded. So we do have approximately a year's worth of funding in a general fund, and that's about $8.5 to $9 million. That is dedicated, different aspects of it are dedicated to certain functions. Our auditor suggested that we put aside $1 million to cover future contributions to the state employee retirement system, which is about what our annual contribution is. So we've done that. We have some money put aside to cover payouts of accrued vacation time should an employee leave. We have some workman's comp type, we have some funds set aside for that. About a third of that fund is in cash that we can, pay, ongoing daily, business transactions. A second reserve fund we have is called our Sustainable Water Resources Fund, and that is also about a balance of $8 million. That was initially created in 2010, I believe, with some funds from the natural gas industry to create and maintain a system of water quality monitors to, we don't have authority or regulation over water quality, but we're still concerned about it. So as they were developing well pads and their other infrastructure, we wanted to see if they were having an impact on water quality. So that fund was put in place to create that system and to maintain it. Those sensors are now nearing the end of their life. They're no longer supported by the manufacturer. So just as an example, we're expending $1 million from that fund to replace those sensors with modern sensors to continue those operations. That fund is sustained now by any fines or penalties that we impose on a project or water user that's found to be in noncompliance. And that's the only source, that's the only place we put funds like that. We don't budget for them. We have no idea what fines or penalties may be coming in, but we figure if we do collect any in a year, we can put them in that fund and do some good with them. And I'll just mention, again, to be completely forthcoming, we don't call it a reserve fund, but we do have a water management fund that is about $28 million, and that is accrued by consumptive use mitigation fees. The compact and our regulations require the mitigation of consumptive use, as Representative Mao stated. That's the depletion of water that's not used but not returned to the basin. Municipalities do not consume water. They distribute it and it comes back and is treated and discharged. But industries, power plants, they consume water. And the concern and one of the unique role of SRBC is to mitigate for that depletion of water during times of drought so that the river can continue to flow and people downstream can continue to use it to generate power. So there is an option for industries that are consuming water to mitigate on their own behalf, either stopping the consumption of water during a drought, which isn't a realistic possibility for power plants, or to rely on storage of water. In other words, water that's already been removed from the stream during higher flow periods, so they're not depleting it during droughts. Again, that isn't an easy task for many industries to undertake. So an option was created to pay SRBC a fee for their consumptive use. We accumulate that fee, and on their behalf, we promulgate large storage projects for use of mitigating consumptive use by way of releases during droughts. And any of those projects could cost millions of dollars. We have a loan for access to an Army Corps of Engineers flood control reservoir in Clearfield County, sort of like a mortgage, and we were required to hold that for a certain period of time and hold $4 million back. There was an early early payment penalty, but next month that window expires. So we're looking to take $4 million from that fund and pay off that loan so that we can continue to operate that project, but not pay the interest rates on it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Delicio. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Dehoff, for your testimony. You had said previously that you were looking to give discounts to various municipalities in your new approach to how you manage fees with the municipalities, golf courses, and what have you. And yet, at the same time, you talked about financial difficulties that the SRBC is having. Won't the discounts that you're seeking to offer exacerbate the financial troubles that you described?
To be clear, we're already offering the discounts and intend to very strongly hope we can continue to do that. It's the funds that we're getting from Pennsylvania now on an annual basis allow us to allow that discount. So we would rather be using that money for, well, we would like to be able to use that money for other things in addition to providing discounts, but it is a priority for us, as long as what we're getting from Pennsylvania sustains it, to continue to provide those discounts.
The next question I have is, you had mentioned about the Water Resource Fund. I'm not sure if that's the exact title of it, but you had said that the SRBC has no water quality function, which is clear in your compact, and yet you are taking on a water quality function. Can you describe why you're doing that and how you justify that when it's in conflict with your compact?
It's not in conflict. Actually, what I said was we have no water quality regulatory authority, but we do have duties and responsibilities related to water quality spelled out directly. It's the section immediately following water supply, so it does have prominence in our compact. We have been monitoring water quality for nearly 40 years for the purposes of determining what the states are contributing by way of nutrient and sediments to the Chesapeake Bay. We also have a long-standing program that looked at water quality across state lines to determine, is one state impairing the water quality in another state. It isn't always the case that water flows from New York to Pennsylvania to Maryland. There are places where water flows from Pennsylvania into New York before it comes back into Pennsylvania. So there are definitely interstate interests. And we also assist states and the federal government in assessing where impairments are occurring, what is the source of impairments, and making recommendations for how those impairments to water quality can be restored. It's much cheaper to collect and use cleaner water than it is dirty water. You don't have to treat it as much. So there is an interest in the citizens of the basin and the members in having us do that work. It's not a conflict at all. It's a very important component to the usability of the water for recreation, for tourism, for industry, for drinking water.
Okay, my final question has to do with well, I'll come back to it if I can, Mr. Chairman.
Representative McCarter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions going to the situation with the amount of water that's forecast to be used by the drilling industry in terms of natural gas. I see in your handout here that roughly 91 million gallons of water is currently the amount of water that's taken out going back to 2012, at least to the 173 locations of water extraction. And approximately, as I see, is the estimate that a third of that coming into the future could be from natural gas sites. Is that accurate? 30 million gallons is expected to be the...
That is our long-term projection. I'm not sure that that's my testimony, but okay. That number does sound familiar, yes. In 2008, when the industry was beginning to develop in the basin, we looked at what was going on in Texas and Oklahoma, how many rigs there are, how much water is used in each frac, and determined that long-term build-out could be about 30 million.
How much of the projection of that, along with all the water use that you're talking about, what is your time or your time frame for projection use for sustainability?
We've been focused on where the sourcing of the water, so to make sure that it is sustainable. We're actually seeing the peak was about 10 to 12 million gallons a day in 2012, 2011. So our focus has been directing the industry to more sustainable sources like the Susquehanna River itself, as opposed to small trout streams that are directly near a pad site. And we've been able to convince them to do that by putting in place some incentives. We turn around a permit more quickly for a site on the river, and we'll also put in, we have a policy that imposes some limitations to protect your smaller streams, like your trout streams, in terms of when they can take water and how much they can take. So it became logical for them to pursue more sustainable sources.
And how much of a conflict is it for private owners to sell their water to the companies for that use, in looking at how you look at the sustainability of the entire system? Is that a problem?
If the system has been evaluated and its sources have been proven to be able to supply a specific quantity of water, then as far as we're concerned, the making water available to the gas industry they're really just another customer on the system.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have two members that are not on the committee that both wanted to ask a question. I'll allow them to each ask one question if they'd like. And then we'll be moving on to the next testifier, Representative Tallman, and then Representative Kiever.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had two questions, but I'm only going to ask one. Thank you for coming to Selinsgrove. We talked about the drive up the river this morning.
Did.
Have you ever been to Woolwich, Pennsylvania?
I have not.
Well, my mother's side of the family is Quiggle. Our Quiggle family reunion is held in Woolwich. SRBC is going to charge Woolwich, Pennsylvania, over $100,000. And that's a very small town in Clinton County. They can't pay it, they're going to go bankrupt. So what do you suggest? Because you said little towns aren't part of it. Well, Woolwich is a very small town.
Right.
That's where your Woolwich Woolens come from, by the way.
Understood. We have not made any determination whatsoever what, if anything, we're going to charge Woolwich. They are collecting data regarding their water usage. It may be that some or all of their wells fall below our jurisdictional thresholds. What we do know is that the operator at the time, 20 years ago, should have pursued SRBC approval to operate their wells. They did not. So it's a very difficult situation where we're trying to determine how best to proceed. Our interest is not in punishing that system, particularly because the new owners were not responsible for the noncompliance 25 years ago. Our interest is getting them under approval if needed, so that they have the certainty that their wells can provide water to their businesses and homeowners as they need it during a drought.
Thank you, Representative Tallman. Representative Kiever.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Dayhoff. I have a question for you regarding the funding. It's limited, and you said your money's limited. Commonwealth cut your budget last year, cut so far in this year. And I've read the compact, I've studied extensively, so I understand that you're permitted to monitor and capture quality data, but if your resources are limited, why would you be investing so much in the quality when the quantity needs are so extensive? It just seems like there's a little bit of a disparity there.
We think both are important. The problem is, as far as quality goes, who do you charge a fee to? You know, we think that water users should be responsible for paying, as opposed to general taxpayer money, for paying for the review of their water usage. We think it's an investment that gives them a secure source of water for the duration of the permit. We will, not only does that permit them to use water, but we will defend their use of water. Should a new well be drilled in proximity to a community's sources, and they begin to see impact on their well, we'll say, hey, we have the data. They tested it. We know what the well can provide. there's clearly some impact of this new user that we'll go to court and defend that for them
But
at no
isn't-
cost.
But
Thank-
isn't DEP
Thank you.
collecting that?
Thank you, Representative Keeper. Thank you. Thank you, sir, for your testimony today. We appreciate you joining us
Thank you.
and answering our questions today. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Our next testifier will be Mr. Kyle Gallagher. He's a water operator for Appalachian Utilities Incorporated. And Mr. Gallagher, could join us at the testifier's seat on the stage there, sir. Thank you for joining us, and you can begin when you're ready, sir.
Good morning. I'd like to apologize ahead of time. I'm not a professional speaker like the last testimony.
No need to apologize. We look forward to your testimony and appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. I work for Appalachian Utilities in Woolrich, as previously mentioned. It's a small water company, and it's a small publicly owned private water company. Excuse me, privately owned public water company. We have approximately 30 miles of main line, and we have service to approximately 1,450 accounts in Avis, Woolrich, Pine Creek, and Dunstable townships. Roughly 3,000 residents, their homes, dozens of businesses, 2 schools, 1 factory, and a public fire suppression system for 2 communities rely on our maintenance work for a reliable and safe water service. Appalachian has remained in compliance of all known state and federal regulations since its inception in 1996. And the evidence for that claim is in the reliable submission of all monthly and annual DEP reports and Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission reports. We fall in a unique location where we're regulated by DEP, PUC, and soon to be SRBC. So we'll be submitting our withdrawal data to 3 regulatory agencies. Attachment 1, if everyone has my written testimony, which is, I would consider more important than my verbal testimony. Attachment 1 is a permit to operate the 3 wells that the Susquehanna River Basin Commission want us to permit. A permit provided by DEP, issued in 1997. I don't want to go into too much detail here, or we could sit here for hours and talk about these issues, so I'm going to briefly summarize my testimony to keep it as brief as possible. In just a quick history here, since Appalachian took over ownership of the water company, there were not any rate increases because the owner of the water company does his best to keep the rates down for the customers. It's a rural community, relatively low income. So from 96 to 2015, there was not a rate increase. Due to obvious financial concerns, in 2015 we had to apply to the PUC for a rate increase. That rate case cost us over $270,000 to hire a team of attorneys and rate consultants, both of which were required to get an increase in our rates. So in 2015, the financial strength of Appalachian was low. That's why we needed the rate case. In 2016, we were slowly improving. Obviously, we had some very large bills to pay off from the rate case the previous year. On September 29th, 2016, the SRBC informed Appalachian that the company has been operating out of compliance since 1996. Attachment 2, which is 3 pages in length, is the entire communication, formal communication from the SRBC to Appalachian in 20 years. SRBC's position is that Appalachian failed to contact them, but we're a public water supply. Our records are available to everyone in this room. What have they been doing for 20 years? Where's the accountability? We desire to be in compliance with all the rules and regulations and maintain the system the best that we can. And I want to clarify something else before I forget. The misleading term of a discount for a municipality could also be viewed as a 40% increase for no reason for a private business. I won't bother to contradict the other statements that were made that I find to be bogus. After this initial letter was received, we had 2 conference calls with SRBC, and during those calls, very few of our questions were answered about what they were demanding that we do. We had a permit from the state to operate the wells. In order to get that permit, the DEP required aquifer testing to be completed. That was all done. So, on December 23rd, 2016, after 20 years of not hearing from them, inside of 3 months, we received a second letter, an early Christmas present. At that time, we were still trying to comprehend the costs and the unreasonable demands. They issued us an NOV, a notice of violation, with a threat of a fine that could exceed $1.8 million. And that is growing still today at a rate of $1,000 per day per violation. We had one meeting with the SRBC, and as a result of that meeting, we don't know what they're going to demand we do. There are no clear answers. When you ask them what it costs, there are no clear answers. When you ask them for details about their policies, there are very few clear answers. One thing that we have kind of got an understanding about here is that their fees alone that they want to be paid up front are going to be $65,000. We don't have $65,000 sitting in an account to pay them, so we're not sure what we're going to do. The $65,000 is just for them. I've had a number of meetings with professional geologists to talk about the hydrogeologic work that SRBC is going to demand that we do. And then it became evident that we're actually looking at expenditures of $200,000, $300,000. There's no telling what it could cost. If they don't approve of our well that's already permitted by DEP, we could end up needing to buy land, drill another well, hook that into the system, build a treatment building. It could just go on and on. There's no telling what it could cost if they don't approve of the use of wells that DEP approved of 20 years ago. The other interesting part in the NOV is that it suggests that if commission requirements are not met, they will not allow Appalachian to operate the source wells. To me, that means that there will be no water put in a distribution system for these communities. The fire suppression systems won't work, the schools won't have water, unless they plan on just taking over our small business and running it themselves. We really don't know. We just feel that we're completely under attack with nowhere to turn. Giving this testimony, of course, we feel that they will retaliate against us. My neighboring water systems on both sides of me have lots of stories about SRBC. They both declined to testify for fear of retribution. The costs of several $100,000, or who knows what it's going to cost to meet these demands, is not a one-time thing. They just recently reduced the permit. It'll expire in 5 years. This is a recurring downward spiral that we cannot afford the beginning of. If we have to meet these demands today, our only first step is to go in for an emergency rate case with PUC. That'll cost another $100,000 or $200,000 to do the rate case. And then our customers can't afford the water. And we still have to do the work that SRBC demands, and then we could just do that all again about every year or two. It's impossible. Sorry for the delay. I think I got ahead of myself here.
At whatever point you're ready, we can do some Q&A. Once you're ready for that, when you're finished summarizing there, whatever other points you want to make.
Okay. Attachment 3 is a sub-basin table. I don't understand how anyone with common sense would agree to a compact like that. We have a 25% say as Pennsylvanians. We're paying for everything. We have a 25% say in the policies. Of course, New York and Maryland are going to be okay with increasing the fees. That Pennsylvania is paying for everything. Our residents, our communities, our businesses. If we were able to look at the revenue stream from what New York contributes in their fees and fines, and Maryland, we have to be well into the 90% for the revenue that's created for them. Attachment 4 is an annual report review. I read every report from 1972 to the present, except for the 3 that are missing. The reports are very variable. They don't let you understand what's going on year to year. There's not much consistency to them. But what is interesting is in 2008, you'll see that the total revenue and assets for that year that they reported, $4.7 million. 2009, over $7 million. 2010, over $12.3 million. And in 2011, they had a fantastic year. They made almost $16.5 million. In 2013, they decided to not report the salary and benefit information, and that continues to this day. Not certain of this, but I believe back in the 80s, they had an independent third party that was reviewing these reports. I don't think that that's still going on today. Attachment 5 is the regulatory program fee schedule. And for each line item there, if you go to page 5, and I'd like to correct an error I found in my testimony last night. For a groundwater source that is needing, say, under 100,000 gallons, their fee is $8,225. Now, they claim that the same review is completed for a well that would need, say, 1 million gallons. And for that same work, they charge $24,775 for the same amount of work. A more disturbing detail in the fee schedule is that a well that's needing 100,000 gallons per day for a municipality, that's $6,953. But for the same amount of work, for a private business, it's $12,375. It's not a discount, it's robbery. I would like to know why the Susquehanna River Basin Commission is openly prejudiced against all private business. It's unfair and does not make sense, and they will refuse to answer that. During our attempt to come into compliance, the SRBC, a member of their staff, was trying to persuade us to get an aquifer testing plan waiver for each well. We have 3. The cost for the waiver is $5,125 per well. What that staff member initially didn't tell me was that if they deny that, all of that money, if they read the first page and don't like what they see and they deny it, that money is all forfeited. It will not be applied to their much larger fees for the application process. So after this testimony, I don't feel comfortable applying for a waiver because they're just going to deny it on a technicality. We're going to lose $15,375. So that's not really an option for us. In my personal opinion, this waiver is nothing more than a scam. After conversations with professional geologists, SRBC demands a 72-hour pump test. Those pump tests are roughly $35,000 apiece. There was already 48-hour pump tests completed, and many historical records and data that we have available for our wells, but they're not going to be interested in that. They're going to demand a 72-hour pump test on each well to drive up the fees. I am told that the natural gas industry pays a monitoring fee or some type of a record fee yearly on every natural gas well pad. If a person doesn't even visit the gas well pad, not 1 gallon of water is taken to the pad or removed from the pad, they still charge the fee. It's another example of they collect money for no service.
Not to cut you off there, sir, but we are at the end of your official testimony time.
Okay.
If you had a short point you wanted to wrap it up for us, so I know we've got a couple questions for you.
Okay, my last point is that in 2010, Anadarko applied to the SRBC for a permit to take bulk water from Appalachian. As part of that process, the SRBC reviews the source water, the wells, and they will approve or disapprove based on their technical review and the potential impacts to the basin on about where that water is being removed from. In the fall of 2016, I was told by SRBC staff that they did not learn about and did not know about Appalachian until 2016. In 2011, SRBC collected permit fees from Anadarko and approved Anadarko to take bulk water from Appalachian. What they did there was took fees and provided a permit approval for Anadarko to remove water from Appalachian when they did not review anything. They made approval for Anadarko to take water from wells that were not even approved by SRBC to be operated as Appalachian was for our water distribution system. Again, another example of collecting money, not providing a service, not doing what they said they were doing. We don't know if they did anything but collect the money. And I guess I have some questions there in closing, but I hope you folks will read my testimony, and I'm more than happy to come and visit you in your office to talk about it in more detail.
Thank you, sir. And just a quick question from me. The DEP, who secretary serves on the commission to represent Pennsylvania, who you were permitted by 20 years ago, they never notified you of SRBC's supposed oversight.
No, sir. In 1996, when the work was being done on the wells, Appalachian worked very closely with DEP and local hydrogeologists, and there was never a recommendation to contact SRBC, and SRBC never contacted Appalachian.
Thank you. Representative Whelan.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. Your information here is going to be invaluable. I think a lot of this should be reprinted and made public. You have 1,450 customers, households, correct?
Yes,
households, businesses.
Roughly, yes, sir. Of course, that changes almost daily.
Okay. Now, if I were one of those 1,450 customers, how many times a year could I expect to run out of water? In other words, I go to the tap and I don't get any water.
We try for 0, but our average is probably once.
Once? And for how long? Days, weeks?
In recent years, the most that I had a street out of water was probably 4 or 5 hours.
4 or 5 hours. Okay. And again, your customer base is spread out over 1,450 accounts. The math based on the fees, potential penalties, and again, I'm back to that I'm one of your customers. What should I budget for next year if everything comes to fruition here? In other words, what I pay now with these fees and SRBC stepping in, what should my household expect to pay in addition? Quick math, I won't hold you to the number. But
That's extremely difficult to answer, but our last increase was 30%, and I guess also worth noting that the PUC reviewed every dime during our rate case, but they never asked us what we were paying to SRBC. It's another question mark. I would expect it to go up 50 or 100% to try and cover these ongoing fees that are never going to end. They're just going to go up, and there's no way our customers can afford that.
And do you come from a part of the state that it's growing? In other words, I'm again one of your 1,450 customers. Am I going to get a lot of neighbors?
No, sir. We average, since I've started working there about 6 years ago, our average growth is between 5 and 10 accounts per year.
So we're not going to be able to spread that, all these fees, the SRBC
That's impossible.
fees out over new customers. So
Impossible.
And obviously the median household income is at the state average or below?
Probably below.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Whelan. That's all the time that we have for questions for this testifier. We appreciate you joining us today, sir, and taking time out of your workday to be here and sharing your expertise with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day, sir.
You too.
Our next testifier will be Mr. Pete Ramsey. He's the president of Pennsylvania Toughgrass Council, grounds manager for Messiah College, and agronomist for the Range End Golf Club. Sir, you can begin your testimony when you're ready.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for taking the time to allow us to speak today. I'm representing the golf course industry, golf course superintendents who maintain those facilities, also other turfgrass professionals, athletic field managers, and the Pennsylvania Turfgrass Council. point of information, the Turfgrass Council is the fundraising arm for Penn State University turfgrass research. We provide education and funding to help do research at Penn State. So really, I feel like I'm here to represent turfgrass managers throughout the state as a whole. I believe you each have a copy of my testimony that I'll review. Consumptive users within the basin are facilities that use 20,000 gallons per day based on a 30-day average. As it relates to the turfgrass industry, in the early 1990s, the Commission made a concerted effort to bring golf courses in as consumptive users. They were more than willing to work with us to bring us into compliance. It was made clear, though, that if we failed to do so, we would be considered to be out of compliance. Most of us felt like we really had no choice. It really just appeared that the water at or under our facilities was not ours at all. Facilities were required to install meters, perform aquifer tests, perform flow tests on surface withdrawals, calculate evaporation from ponds, and permit irrigation systems. Applicants were given the choice of a one-time upfront fee, or you could pay the ongoing usage fee, which back in the 90s was 14 cents per 1,000 gallons. It is now 33 cents per 1,000 gallons. Facilities were grandfathered certain quantities for operations that predated regulation. I believe I'm correct, and I offer Mr. Dayhoff to refute if I say something that is incorrect. But for consumptive use was 1971, groundwater 1978, surface water 1995. We were told as consumptive users with approved dockets, we would be exempt from legal action, and the Commission would use the revenue from fees to build storage into the basin for those in compliance. The Commission admitted to us several years ago at one of our meetings, and again recently at a meeting that Mr. Dayhoff talked about, that we requested at SRBC headquarters, that this was never done. Subsequently, consumptive users are required to monitor all sources, record meters, submit usage, print out your own invoice, and mail in the check at the end of every quarter. If records or payments are not received on time, or you have overages from your docket for any reason, the Commission sends us certified mail threatening civil penalties. Facilities are inspected annually by SRBC staff who want to see our records, inspect our meters, and review our dockets. A lot of us, we had 25-year dockets. If they were originated sometime throughout the 1990s, we are now entering an era where the dockets are expiring and we're starting to look at reapproval. Those new dockets are only good for 15 years. The gentleman before me testified to a lot of these fees. I rounded these fees down slightly. These are most of the fees that apply to the amount of water that we use in the golf course or athletic field industry that you can see there. I'll use myself as an example. Since 1998, RainGen spent $23,000 with a hydrogeologist to permit our well. I have spent $28,000 in usage fees to the Commission in about 20 years. For reapproval, which for me will be, I think, in 2023, I will owe the Commission $23,600 in just fees for reapproval. If I'm not granted the waiver, which he's correct, is over $5,100, I will be subject to a 72-hour pump test, which is upwards of $30,000 in our part of the state. Every facility that has a docket is unique. There are no two facilities that are operating under the same parameters, but we are all subject to the same fee structure. I know of facilities that are experiencing business interruption due to low flow issues, transfer of ownership of dockets, trying to understand how in the world they're supposed to pay for evaporation from their sources, or their redundant charges off of public sources. At Messiah College, where I'm the director of grounds, we use water to heat and cool all of our academic and dorm buildings. We pay for that water. It's a public water source from Suez Water. We pay a percentage of that back to the township for the sewer fee, like many of us do. And then we had to install meters in order to calculate the evaporation from those heating and cooling systems that we pay to the commission. In essence, we are paying, and this happens to a lot of consumptive users in my industry, we are paying 3 times for the same gallon of water. As far as the golf industry goes, golf is no longer in its heyday. When the economy crashed after 2007, the golf industry has really not recovered. Most facilities are struggling to realize small net profits or even stay in business at all. Against all odds, though, golf in Pennsylvania has accounted for $2.3 billion in 2014. I believe, if I'm correct, that the basin accounts for just about 50% of the state of Pennsylvania. That's $1.1 billion the golf industry can contribute. However, we in the golf industry, we do not have the opportunity to recover the costs associated with what we've been in compliance or legally doing for the last 25 years. For it to cost me or any one of my colleagues that much money only to be able to continue to do what I've legally done with the commission for the last 25 years is criminal, in my opinion. We are not water suppliers. We are not energy producers. We are collectively probably the smallest group of consumptive users within the basin. It would be easier for us to probably take the easy way out and say, you know, let's just scrap the golf course and subdivide and develop our facilities. If you were to take my facility or any golf facility and subdivide it even into generous quarter-acre lots, the carbon footprint of that property would absolutely skyrocket. The townships rely on us to count towards their green space percentage. We are as turfgrass managers and golf course superintendents, we are some of the most highly trained, highly motivated people in agriculture. There's no better way to find out how to save water on our facilities than to go through us. Years ago, the last drought emergency we had was in 2002. DEP had the foresight to work with us as golf course superintendents on regulations that we could work with and how to save water on our facilities. They sat down with us. We helped them write regulations that would still work for us, that would still allow us to operate in a drought emergency. We have not had a drought emergency since then. We are not looking for a free pass when it comes to water. We all believe in monitoring. We all believe in regulation. We are just asking for something reasonable and something that is not redundant. We all report our water usage to DEP. It's part of our drought emergency plans that we are legally obligated to have. At the end of every year, we submit our 12 months of usage to DEP, and they log it in, and if we ever come to another drought emergency, provided things don't change, it'll be a 30% voluntary reduction. They'll probably take our totals, average them out, and look at us for a 30% reduction. We're just asking, where does it end? There's no other organization that we deal with that requires this much from us and this much money. Not the EPA, not the Department of Ag, and not DEP. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think when you mentioned the evaporation issue, so you're buying the water from a public water company,
Suez Water.
and I would assume they're paying the commission. As they're extracting their water as the other water company was extracting theirs, so.
I don't know that they are, but they may be.
But you're already buying the water, then you have to pay for the water you've bought because it might have evaporated some of it?
There is evaporation in the heating and cooling process for air conditioning and heating everywhere.
But you're buying the water, but then you've got to pay because it's evaporated. That's what they're charging you for.
It's confusing to me too.
It's ludicrous. Not just confusing, it's ludicrous. That you've paid for a product once and then you have to pay for whatever you do with that product. Which, I mean, the way things work, it evaporates and it comes back into the...
It applies
the ground later on.
it applies to irrigation as well. If your pond does not predate regulation, there's a calculation that you have to pay for the evaporation off of that pond.
Thank you for exposing the ludicrous nature of what's going on. Members? I only have one on the list for a question. Representative Mao?
If you remember when I gave my introductory speech here, I said about the hair standing up on the back of my neck. I think there's several people sitting up here that could now understand what I was talking about. But let me, in interest of time, and thank you for your testimony, let me see if I got this right. If you have a golf course and you have a well or a couple wells on that golf course, and you take water out of your land, out of your well on your land, you get charged per 1,000 gallons of water that comes out of that well in a consumptive use plan.
In a consumptive use plan, you're not directly charged for the water that comes out of that well. You're charged when that water goes through your pump station out onto your property.
Okay, so if you pump it into a pond so that you can later on irrigate your fairways, you pay for it to come out of the well through your pump house to the pond, and then you're charged an evaporation rate for water. Do you get credit for rain?
No, we don't.
You get no credit for rain?
No.
So there's no way that the SRBC could possibly know how many hot, sunny days we're going to have to determine exactly how much water is going to be evaporated, and there's absolutely no way that the SRBC can predict in a year's time how much rainfall we're going to get that puts that water back, even though you're putting that water from your pond that you took out of your ground back into the ground through ways of irrigation. So basically you're just cycling it around and they're taking a fee out of the middle.
That's true. We're pulling water off our properties or out of our aquifer, and we're spreading it back over top of the aquifer. Now, there's no doubt that some of that water through that operation will evaporate. We are not watering our golf courses so heavy to the point that the water is making it 100 feet down back into that aquifer. As turfgrass managers, as golf course superintendents, what you see on TV a lot of times is not the reality of golf in my industry. We are not carbon hogs. We are not water hogs. We maintain playing surfaces. They just so happen to have grass on them that we, quite honestly, barely try to keep alive.
And if I've got this correct, and you did mention I play a little golf, not much, but golf isn't what it was years ago. Public golf courses are struggling.
Yes.
If you have to forego sprinkling, irrigating your fairways, then your business actually dies out.
Our product is that golf course. If we lose putting greens for whatever reason, there's no product. That's happened. It happened to a facility last year in Huntington County.
And if this keeps going with these erroneous fees, basically you're out of business down the road.
I just can't. I mean, in my case, that well, I mean, I know it's 2023, but I need to start working on it now. We don't spend that much money in capital equipment in 1 year.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Mao. One final question for this testifier from Representative Kiefer.
Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. As a resident of your area, I know what you're talking about. My question is, how many ponds do you have there?
I have one.
You You have one pond. And the purpose of these fees, a lot of the fees as far as consumptive use goes, is for storage and dams to retain water. So you don't get any credit or any, pay you any fee for storing that water?
No.
So you get nothing back. But what are your annual rates on the evaporation off of that pond? Approximate, what does that cost you?
At Range End, because Range End was built in 1954, the pond was there in 1954. It was a man-made, machine-dug, spring-fed pond. That pond predates regulation for evaporation. So I am exempt from evaporation at my facility. Many facilities are not. At Messiah, for my heating and cooling of the buildings, I am not exempt from evaporation.
Okay.
I have a groundwater withdrawal, a well for Range End, which goes into our pond, and then we pay the consumptive use that comes through the pump station.
Thank you, Representative Kiefer. Representative McCarter for the final short question.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick question. Range is a public course.
Range End's a public course.
Do the same regulations apply exactly the same to private courses?
They are exactly the same. There's no difference between public or private.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for
Thank you.
joining us today. Thank you for sharing your expertise. We appreciate it. Our next and last testifier is Mr. Ed Albright. He's the chairman of the Bloomfield Borough Water Authority, and he's also joined by Michael Sheffy, plant operator, Bloomfield Borough Water Authority. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Are both of you going to deliver some part of the testimony, or just one the testimony and Q&A?
I'm going to do the testimony.
Thank you, sir.
And he's going to answer the questions because he's been with the plant. I can answer some, but he's been with the plant for quite a long time.
Thank you. We're ready when you are, sir.
All right. Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee, Representative Mole. I appreciate you setting this up. My name's Ed Albright, and I'm the chairman of the Bloomfield Borough Water Authority in Perry County. We serve about 1,100 customers, and we have 4 wells to do that. We have 4 wells, but not all of them are great producers. So we're in this situation because DEP said you need more water because of drought. So we started a new well, which got us in trouble with SRBC. All right, our dealings with SRB concerns our 2 existing wells and a new one under construction. In January 2009, we contacted SRBC by email about wells 1 and 2 at Perry Village, requesting a groundwater withdrawal application. We didn't hear anything back of it until December 2014, nearly 6 years later. In December 2015, we were put under a consent order because we did not abide by their regulations. So we were in a consent order for wells 1 and 2. I think you may have a copy of the consent orders. If you don't, I can make them available to you. They came back on us pretty hard. I being the chairman only for a few years, we got our solicitor involved, and we got in a conference call with SRBC, and we went back and forth, and they decided, since we tried to contact them, they were going to be nice and not fine us, but we had to go along with the consent order they presented to us. We signed a consent order. In February this year, we received a letter from SRBC revising our well schedule for well 2. In April, a waiver application was submitted to SRBC for a fee of $3,832. The cost of the authority for preparing the application for the waiver, we had to pay our geological services $21,000 for them to get all the information that SRBC required. In the waiver for well 2, if the waiver for well 2 is approved, we'll need to submit an application for fee for $4,622, and we don't know how much that's going to cost us for the application being filled out by our geoservices. We're suspecting it's going to be around $10,000 to $15,000. We should know by the fall of this year whether it's been approved. Since SRBC only meets 2 times a year to make any kind of decisions, it's very hard for small water authorities to get anything done unless we project years ahead of time because of the way SRBC does their approval only 2 times a year. Now, as for well 3, the work began in November of 2010 with the well testing. In July of 2012, we re-drilled the well for production. In March of 2014, the pump test was submitted for well 3 to SRBC, and we were told approval would come within 6 months. However, it actually took a year for the pump test to be approved. In May of 2015, we did a step-down test to determine the suitable yield for well 3. Then in July of that year, we completed the pump test. In December of 2015, the pump test data was submitted to SRBC using their online application. Then in September of 2016, SRBC approved our well 3 application. Our total cost for well 3 to date, which includes the drilling, is over $200,000, and we have not even hooked into our system yet. In conclusion, we have well 3 is going to come online, and I can answer the first testifier's question. We have a USDA loan for $2.8 million for a tank and a filtration system to get well 3 back up online, and also to take care of some of the infrastructure that we have. We have raised our rates 7 times over the last 15 years to get to this point, so we have some kind of reserve that we can take care of our infrastructure. But, you know, a 40-year loan is going to be good for our ratepayers to the point where we don't have to increase their rates to pay for this. But we're a small community. We have retired people, and for them to pay their water bill, sometimes it gets very difficult. We have a good rate of people who pay their bills on time, and we work with the ones who don't. Very rarely do we shut the water off on them. So that's all I had to say, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir. So the commission had not been involved in any activity with your authority until 2014, 6 years after you originally contacted them in 2009. Had they permitted anything prior to that, or were they involved with you, or were they aware of you in the
I'll let Mike talk to that.
They were involved with us back in 1990 when we brought what we call BBWA Well 1 online. We have 2 dockets with them for existing wells from back in, like I said, 1990. I think the other one is 2001. The dates that are referred to there concern Perry Village. We acquired that water system in 2007, and we had contacted the SRBC sometime after that date to say, hey, we've got these 2 additional wells now. Do you want them on your docket? We didn't hear anything from them.
So 6 years later,
Yeah.
you heard from them in 2014, December.
And what alerted them to that was when we were submitting our test plan for well 3. They said, oh, we see you have another water system.
So the DEP, I would assume, had already worked with you and permitted these wells?
Correct.
Back in 2007, 8, or 9, whenever they were first started in the Perry Village?
And those wells were part of a public water system prior to us acquiring them. We just bought it.
So it's just baffling to me that we have the DEP secretary that is our representative with the commission, and that the DEP is working with you and others, and that the SRBC doesn't seem to either be aware of some or communicate with others, in your case for 6 years.
Yes.
And then that they come to you and tell you that you have to accept a consent decree
Correct.
when they hadn't communicated with you, and that they're actually, it appears they're just doing duplicative services from what the DEP is already doing.
That's correct.
So you're paying twice for the same services if they're even rendering any service from the second, from the commission.
Right.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony. The question I have really pertains to some of the former speakers, but I'll ask you. The SRBC approval, I just want to get this again, is they only meet twice a year on applications from you and any other municipality across the Commonwealth?
Exactly.
Okay. And the DEP had previously permitted these wells. When did that occur?
1980 or 73 and 72 or somewhere around there.
73 and 75 for the Perry Village wells. And then 1990 and 2001 for the Bloomfield, for the BBWA well 1 and 2.
You had mentioned, I believe, that there were 7 rate increases over 15 years. Can you quantify, if you would, the percentage of increase over that period of time? Do you have any idea what percentage of increase that your ratepayers have to pay now?
The first 4 increases were 10% each. And that was to help finance a storage tank. That was a DEP requirement. The last 3 were 5% each. And that's for the Well 3 project that we're currently working on.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Miller. Representative Ward.
I'm going to wave off, thank you.
Representative McCarter.
Thank you again for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question in terms of your rates. You say you've raised them consistently over the past 15 years.
Yes.
What is the average monthly bill of the 1,100 customers right now?
We have 2 rate structures. Residential is $84.95
Per month.
per quarter for the first 4,000 gallons they use. Then after that, every 1,000 gallons they use above 4,000 is $8.45. That's residential.
Okay, so on average, what would a residential?
That's a tough one because we have households of all sizes, but an average bill probably would be $124 a quarter. That's residential.
And commercial then?
Commercial, I have 3 commercial customers that are large. They pay around $7,500 a quarter. Then I have a whole bunch of little commercials, mom and pop stores.
Mm-hmm.
They pay around $90 a quarter because they use so little water since they're commercial.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative McCarter. Any other members? Representative Mowell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. Let me see if I got this right. You acquired another system.
A public water system from another source, yes.
From another source that was already there for many years.
Yes.
With wells One well, two wells?
2 wells.
2 wells producing water, so they had good reputation, good flow, so all the data was there. So, okay, so when you brought those on, that I take it that threw up a red flag to SRBC. They come in and said, hey, we didn't permit these, in a sense. You didn't tell us about these wells, so you haven't permitted them, and therefore we're going to require you to go through the standard pump test just like they were brand new wells, even though they were existing wells and you had the data for umpteen years of their existence.
Right.
So you had to do a a drawdown test, pump test?
No, we asked for a waiver, and we have our waiver application in right now, waiting for it to be approved. They told us it would probably be in September.
And when did you file that?
Oh, that waiver was filed
End of May.
End of May, okay. So in September, you'll know whether you get approval on that or not.
Exactly.
I'm sincerely hoping that since you're here today, that waiver still is granted as opposed to not being granted. If you have to do a pump down test on it, if they deny the waiver, what kind of fees are you looking at for your little community to bring those wells legally online in their eyes?
Well, we'd have to do the 72-hour pump test, and then we'd have to do the 48,
Yeah, 72.
72-hour pump test, which cost us for well number 3 in excess of $50,000.
You say you've already had to do?
Oh, for well 3.
For well 3. Mm-hmm. And why was that one so expensive? What did you do? How much did you have to pump? How long? I'm trying to wrap my head around how much water you pump out and where you pump it to.
Well, we pump it into a creek, which we had to run a quarter of a mile line through. DEP said it wasn't a lawful waterway, so we had to go to an existing creek. So we had to run a quarter of a mile with 4-inch hose.
4-inch hose, size of a fire hose, full blast.
All the way down, right, for 70, we did that for 72 hours.
About how many gallons of water do you think you pumped downstream in 72 hours?
Over 1 million.
Over 1 million gallons of water you took out of the ground.
Yeah.
Good thing that didn't evaporate out of your pond. That would have cost you a fortune.
Well, right now we're doing a SWIFT test for DEP for well 3. It's a 180-day test. We have to pump 210 gallon a minute for 7 hours a day into a creek.
For half a year?
Yes. So we're probably looking 8-9 million gallon or more that we'll just be pumping down the creek, which I think we should get credit for from SRBC.
Well, I'll let you deal with SRBC on that one, but my bet is you're going to wind up on the losing end of that deal. But okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Mall. Thank you both for your, Representative Whelan for a final question?
I was going to suggest you have a golf course near you.
No, we have no room for a golf course. We're a small bedroom community.
Now you are an authority, so obviously you contract with an attorney, a solicitor.
We have our
correct?
solicitor, yes.
Any recourse against the SRBC? Is he or she advising you on any way to proceed other than full cooperation? Is there court of common pleas? Can you take it to court? Federal court?
Sir, we're a small municipality, and we really can't fight SRBC. We can't fight DEP. Where do we go? I mean, I'm not going to raise my rates just because I have to take somebody to court, which I know I'm not going to win. They're the law.
They got you. Checkmate.
They got us, right.
Checkmate.
Yep. And I'd like to tell you about the authority's salaries. We're very open about it. I, as chairman, make nothing. My 3 board members make nothing. The only 2 salaried people we have is Mike, who's our plant operator and our secretary. So, we're frugal. Thank you for your time. We
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Representative Whelan. Thank you, sir, for taking time to be with us. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you sharing your expertise today. Thank you. Helping us to understand the issue better. We appreciate it. So we will be having another hearing in 2 weeks on the same topic with some different testifiers, possibly some of the same testifiers, depending on how things come together here. Appreciate the members' time today. It does concern me that we have an entity that doesn't come under our Independent Regulatory Review Act and doesn't seem to come under any other type of regulatory review act from the federal government or the state government that would be held accountable to regulations they're promulgating or be held accountable for regulations they're promulgating. So that came out early in the hearing today, and I think a lot of new information for many of us. Some information that we've heard before that was confirmed today, new information, so we'll look forward to the next hearing. And I appreciate the members' time today. This meeting, we're looking for a motion to adjourn. Representative Whelan makes a motion, Representative Hill seconds. This meeting's adjourned. Everyone have a great day, and we'll see you back at the Capitol.